Hey everybody, Devin here with Linux Reviewed, and in this episode we're going to be looking at Solus OS, or the Solus Project. So I actually had intended to release this video probably about 2 days ago, but ran into some technical difficulties that I will go through as we progress through this review. Now, some of you who maybe watched my channel for some time are going to notice that if I am running the operating system on bare metal, that's a pretty good sign, right? It's a pretty good sign. So, couple things. One, I picked Solus because I've been hearing a bit about it, and the name kind of sounded familiar to me. I was like, man, it's almost like I've heard of Solus before. And I did some reading on it and found out I've actually used this Linux distribution many years ago, but back then it was running a very ugly GTK2 desktop, and this was around the time of, I believe, GNOME 3 coming out, so it was kind of like, felt old. In other cases and scenarios that kind of went wrong during that time, because I'd used it, was pretty decent, but the other thing that went wrong was the fact that there was new direction that they were trying to take, and they had reached out to the community, and they basically received a denial of service attack when they reached out to the community. And I was like, I'm not staying with this project. I really thought it would be a dead project. So like I said, though, I've been hearing about it. Knowing that, I was like, okay, I'm interested. I installed Solus, and initially, I'm going to be honest, when I first loaded it up, I was like, this is very boring. Right, we have this standard, taskbar up here. You click on the set of icons, and it's a standard menu option. So I almost ended up not doing it. And initially I was running Ubuntu 16.04 and was running this in a VM, and I started reading a little bit more about the philosophy, and it pulled me in. So let's kind of go through it because it does integrate with what this desktop is about. So let's first talk about the desktop. So like I said, very plain, right? Just a standard bar. You've got this icon tray over here. You can pin applications, and a very boring menu set, right? And very minimalist in a sense. But the other thing that kind of bothered me when I first seen this was, I go, okay, there's obviously some GTK element here. It's very much apparently a fork. No. Solus is running what's called the Budgie desktop, and this desktop is running the full GNOME 3 stack, the latest GNOME 3 stack. And you guys can understand, I mean, that's really cool because, part of my issue, so let's take a look at something like boxes, for example. Okay. When you have someone who forks the GTK desktop, so very often like in the Pantheon Desktop or the Unity Desktop, a problem you run into is GNOME Boxes doesn't work. And I get it, some people are like, I've got VirtualBox. Okay, that's great, but one of the problems that I've had with something, say, like VirtualBox, was getting certain Linux operating systems to scale correctly. So here is the KDE Neon distribution, which might be coming up here in a review at some point. And one of the issues I have with VirtualBox is, like, a lot of times I get stuck with like a 1024 by 800 resolution, and then you guys end up suffering when I go through these desktops, because in too many cases, we run into everything's big and ugly. So having something like GNOME Boxes for my virtualizer is kind of an important thing that I've discovered for myself. And just in general, like, when using Unity, like, I really like the No Music player. It doesn't work really well in Unity, and I think in like some of the latest versions they do. So like a good example of this is, since Canonical's updated like all the GTK applications in Ubuntu, I think No Music has worked for me. But like in previous releases of Ubuntu prior to 16.04, I would try and use No Music, and was not very successful with it. So having that GTK stack is in an up-to-date version, and not a forked version of it, its actual GTK stack is, pretty important to me. One of the things, though, that you will notice, so, they have a software center. And with the software center, it is, I the GNOME Software Center. The only difference that you notice, a lot of these things have been redesigned, and these people are very big on making an intuitive, pleasant to look at, easy to use desktop. And one thing I will comment them on is the theming is very nice. The default theme is something I've really enjoyed, and it's been pretty consistent through everything that I've been doing. And we'll get into what kind of themes they're running. The update manager, of course, is here. You can look at your installed applications here, right? We'll get into this one in a second. You're able to search for your applications, and then you can kind of like come in here to your settings and set, what you're wanting to do, right? The update manager, let's see if we can actually pull up a picture of it, is kind of interesting. It reminds me of something that Linux Mint has been doing. So, like traditionally, and like a lot of, let's see if and I'd recognize it. And Solus is, I think it's getting some name recognition, but it's still not huge. So, like in that kind of case and scenario, there's not a whole lot on it. Let's see. So, unfortunately, like they've got it covered here, which is kind of a shame. But you basically, like in Mint, you have 3 categories. So you have your required updates, you have your security patches, and then I think there's like an optional set. I have been installing all of them and haven't really, if anything, I've noticed improvements. Now, when talking about the update process with Solus, it is not a 6-month or an LTS or anything like that. It's kind of like its own Debian in a sense. It is a rolling release. Now, it is like the perfect blend. It is like the in-between Arch and Debian rolling release. So, like Debian, it rolls updates in not every day. It's basically they take a series of updates, they package it, they get it ready, and they push it to the machine. I don't know exact frequency. It seems relatively frequent, like maybe once a month, maybe a couple times a month, something like that. But it's not quite Arch status where you could potentially have updates daily. And then on the other side of things, though, it's more up to date than Debian, because Debian's a great distribution, especially if you crave the extreme stability. The problem with Debian, though, is you'll get on there and it's like, man, this feels like Linux 2 years ago, right? Can't type. And so as we can see, it's running kernel 4.9, which is very modern. I think if we were to go look at, say, some of the GTK applications that it's running, so if I was to go to, say, like my installer, I'd probably just search. So let's look up like GNOME boxes. You'll notice 3.24. And that's something else I want to kind of point out that's kind of crucial and critical, is the fact that sometimes when you use the fork, you end up with different versions of the GTK throughout the application sets, and that brings stability as an issue. So remember, I was like, hey, we'll come back to this installed section, right? Or third party. Here's where you can get your proprietary software. Things like Android Studio, Bitwig Studio, Flash, Google Chrome, Google Earth, Google Talk plugin, and a bunch of others that I don't necessarily know. Plex, Skype, Spotify, Viber, WPS Office Suite. You click on the install, it installs it, and then I guess if it's an application, now something with like Google Chrome, I don't know if with Google Chrome if you would actually have to check for updates, as Google Chrome typically keeps itself up to date. So that's something I might post back on a later video of, hey, I was unsure about this. It does or does not. But like other applications, for example, like Flash probably does not have a auto update mechanism for Linux, at least. You would probably be able to then update when there's a new version available in the package manager. And so this kind of excited me for a bit of another reason. So, okay, so Solus is clean, it's unique looking, it's nice. But, a long time ago when I was using Ubuntu, I remember when Ubuntu started to do this, right? I remember when Ubuntu started to introduce things like Skype to their software center, and Plex and Dropbox and all this other good stuff. And a lot of you might be like, why is that relevant? Why is that important? Well, if you advocate for Linux anyway and you try to move people to Linux, one of the biggest problems is, how do I install third-party software? Now, a lot of us could make the argument, well, you could do it the Windows way. You just go to Google's website, Google Chrome's website, and you download the installer and you install it. But the problem boils down to, then the person should ask you, so what makes this any better than Windows? Why should I use it? And then we start arguing about things people don't care about, like GPL and privacy and licensing and open source this and that. And the reason I say people don't care is it's not that it's not an important subject to them. We don't care. But if a majority of people actually cared about those things, no one would be running proprietary software, right? So apparently a lot of people don't care. So that being said, them doing this is helping break down some of those barriers. And believe it or not, someone in my own IT department, I had introduced to Linux, and they said, Google Chrome is just not working right. And I said, oh, well, where did you install it at? They said, well, it's Linux. I looked up how to do it in the command line. And honestly, it's not that hard in the command line, right? You just do a wget to the URL, right? And then if you're on Ubuntu, sudo dpkg-i package name. And maybe for Chrome it might be more than that, but generally when dealing with debs or with RPMs, then it's rpm-i, whatever, that's what you do. Okay, so in that case, like I said, this breaks down a barrier. This really helps new people get onto the desktop and be happy. Now, one thing, if I haven't pointed out, and I might have already, this is not based on anything. So this is their own distribution. They're not Ubuntu based, they're not Debian based, they're not Arch based. They are packaging all of this themselves. And so for me, like in a sense, that was a little challenging because pretty much every distribution has a pretty clear set of commands. So sudo apt, sudo yum, sudo dnf, sudo pacman, and all this stuff. And so when I first came to Solus, I was kind of having a hard time finding the package system, because if I can, I'd rather install my packages via the command line versus the GUI, because sometimes the GUI fails and the command line usually doesn't. And if the command line does fail, you can see it failing. Okay. In Solus, they actually have their own package manager, and it's called EOPKG. And I have no idea what it stands for. And the commands, like apt or yum or whatever, are very similar. So if I wanted to say install, I don't know, Audacity, sudo apt or sudo eopkg install Audacity, I type in my root password, and then see, it finds it, and then it says there are extra packages. Do you want the dependencies? You want to install them? Well, sure, I'll say yes, and it'll go through and it'll run through the installer, and it's it's pretty decent looking. It's not bad. I'm kind of a bigger fan of the new apt that Ubuntu uses, because if you use Ubuntu and you're still using apt-get, you don't have to. You can use apt. To me, like the little status bars running across are just kind of cool to look at. This is a little bit, it's not bad, but it's not great. But you notice it installed, and then same concept. I could come in here and do a remove, and then it removes it. And then at the same time, let's say I do this and everything goes horribly wrong, reinstall, right? Now the other thing that I actually found pretty cool, and then for like the update part I found nice, because I could do a sudo epoch or epackage or whatever you want to call it. I could do an upgrade, which will run the update process, or if I wanted to, I could do a this and say like an application, and I could manually upgrade specific pieces of my operating system if I choose to. Now, when it does come to the update process, because of the fact, like I said, they're not quite Debian slow, and so the updates aren't as big as you would get on Debian, but they're not like Arch, where Arch is continuously pushing updates every day, and most Arch users patch about every 1 to 2 weeks. When the updates I have had to go through, and I've gone through 2 sets so far on here, they're quite big and they take quite some time to do. So that is the only downside I'll give them, is really if they could work on their update times, because if I'm just jumping on the computer for 5 minutes to get something done, but I want to run updates, they're not as fast as they would be on a, say, 6-month release or a 12-month release or a 24-month release, 48-month, an LTS like Ubuntu. The upside to it is if there's updates for my packages, those all get up to date. So I'm running the latest version of just about everything. Other aspects, though, I will also say that I didn't particularly care for. One thing, at least in the UI, is the, I guess you call it like a system tray, right? Your little applets run. The only thing I didn't really like about it, I don't mind it being there. I think it's kind of fine. But notice there's like a discoloration, so there's a little line here, and you can tell that this is almost a separate widget running. Most modern distributions with a modern desktop like KDE or GNOME, or I even think Unity was pretty solid. Anyway, the bars, one single color in the applets, look like they're floating on top of the bar, much like the icons do. And so that's kind of something that I do have a little bit of a complaint with in terms of cosmetics that maybe might get ironed out at some point. Now, one of the cool things that I do like is, so example being, is this piece. So this is actually something that I think I've seen on like, I don't even know where in the Linux community. I think it was like Deepin. However, Windows has something like this. I know Mac OS had it for a long time, where you can open up your system, your notification tray, and just do a mass dismissal of your notifications or what have you. We could also get to system settings. We could lock the screen or power the machine on or off from here. Then we could go to applets, and so the applets have the ability to have more functionality in this tray thing that loads. So example being like, the clock here. If I actually click on the clock, I can open the calendar, I can go to preferences, I could do, all that fun stuff. But the other nice thing is when I go into the tray and I go to applets, here's also my calendar. Also, I have my volume control, and with my volume control, I also have built-in controls for speaker, built-in audio, HDMI, blah, 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 and then my input devices. So that's kind of nice. Now, one thing that kind of threw me is I saw this gear, and initially it was like, oh, this gear and this, screwdriver and wrench must be the same thing. It's actually not. This gives you settings directly for the Budgie desktop. So a lot of people, if you're familiar with Linux and theming, probably thought we were running the Mocha theme. It's very close to the Mocha theme, but the icon theme is actually the Arc theme. Now, I could come and I could set the Mocha theme, and you'll notice that like here, a few things cosmetically do change. Not a lot of them, but a couple things, like example being this here turns from the gnome dots to the round circle. And I prefer the dots. The round circle just looks like someone wasn't quite sure what to use for an icon, so they just made a circle. Not really a fan of it. But just to give some examples, and so if you install additional themes, this is where you could come in and you could manage your themes. The Breeze cursor, that was something else I found interesting. If you guys didn't catch it, this is a GTK desktop running the KDE, traditionally the KDE cursor. However, it's kind of sat really well with me. And like I said, so you have your button controls, you can change fonts, you can turn on or off desktop icons. We can come here into the panel and see there's all sorts of like little customizations, and for me this was something I actually found to be kind of cool, because traditionally to complete a lot of these tasks, unless you're on Mate offers similar tweaking tools out of the box, but like on GNOME or Unity or whatever, you had to usually install these tweaking tools, and for that to become built into the Budgie desktop, I actually really enjoyed. Now, the other thing I'm going to give you about the Budgie desktop, because the Budgie desktop in a way is kind of unique to Solus, in a way. And what I mean by this is, if you've ever used Linux Mint's Cinnamon desktop on anything other than Mint, you know that the desktop is a damn nightmare. Okay, so Ubuntu, I've seen I think like 2 or 3 attempts, both through PPA and separate release, to have the Cinnamon desktop running on Ubuntu. It always ends up becoming a maintenance nightmare and going away. When I've ran Arch, I actually end up dropping the Cinnamon Desktop because I actually like the Cinnamon Desktop. I think it's a really nice desktop, but it becomes a bug hell for me is what it becomes. And I think a lot of times that's why like Clem is really okay with Arch users having it, because if you want to see how to break something, give it to the Arch users. They will frickin' wreck it, right? And in a good way. It's a good way to figure out what's going on. I will say that this desktop must be a tad bit more user-friendly because, example being, we can come here and now this one's almost a little silly, right? Like, of course it's on Arch, like everything's on flippin' Arch, right? So you could get it on Arch Linux, but here was the other part. I don't know if it's become an official flavor yet. I guarantee it will. Canonical, I have never seen them turn a flavor away as of today. But like, I mean, what's really nice about what this is doing is this isn't like the Cinnamon Desktop where we're watching this not flow onto other desktops. It's flowing onto, and I don't want to say desktops, other distributions. Okay, so to me, I mean, that's really cool. That means that you're going to have a lot of people in different distributions, in different parts of the community helping to develop out this desktop. And that's going to be a really nice piece. So let's go over, you know, like I said, like this video was supposed to air like 2 days prior. Well, my silliness, well, actually, no, let me cover one last bit and it'll lead into this next subject. Package availability. So a concern of mine when it came to package availability was it's not under Ubuntu, it's not under Arch, it's not under just Debian, so these people have to package all their own stuff. And if you've ever used something like OpenSUSE, OpenSUSE is a great distribution, I love it, but it does have obviously less packages than the other three I just named. That was a concern of mine. Well, I'll tell you right now, every piece of software that I'm running on this distribution was available in the repos naturally, with the exception of 3. So the 3 that were not there, well, Microsoft Core Fonts, which kind of get that one. Private Internet Access, which is a VPN provider I use. Yet again, I get that. That's not really on Solus to provide that package. That should be on Private Internet Access. And then the last one that they didn't have was, oh, TeamViewer. They didn't have TeamViewer available in the repos. And so, and I use TeamViewer to do a lot of remote desktop support with friends and family and so on. The cool part, though, about Solus is they have help guides. So one of the things, and they have one that's bigger than this. I'd have to find it. There is one, I got it off the community forums, that has a lot more in this, and that's where I was able to get Java from. I was also able to obtain from a blog post how to install the MS Core fonts, and then Private Internet Access, there was actually a post on the community forum on how to set that up as well. So I actually do have all my software running on here, and to me that is awesome. So I was able, you know, like Steam ran out of the box, right? And so package availability actually has been pretty flawless. Oh, the next part. Now, it's probably not going to show very well because right now I've got, you know, OBS running. I do have, you know, the software, terminal, Firefox, multiple tabs, those kind of things. But out of the box, fresh boot, Solus running, I'm using under 600 megabytes of RAM. And now there was 2 things that come out of this. One, if everything's functionally working very well, then that's really cool, because a lot of distributions have to do this thing where we offer a GNOME desktop and we also offer a lightweight desktop in case your hardware's that old. Now, as time progresses, that's becoming less and less of a problem. Like today, an old laptop has a i3 or i5 with 4 gigs of RAM and a good sized hard drive. Like that would run even the GNOME desktop or KDE, right? So, I mean, it's not as big of a deal, but the nice thing is that this distribution being that light means that it could have theoretically run on a machine with less than a gig of RAM. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do the things I'm doing, but you'd be able to run like a web browser, a mail client, LibreOffice, so on. And I think that's really cool. Now, I did have a concern though. So with the GTK desktop being heavier, I mean, like, I think the lightest I've ever seen a GTK GNOME 3 desktop run was like 900 megabytes, right? When I have seen someone accomplish this, there's something I notice. Performance lag. A good example of this is the Pantheon Desktop. The Pantheon Desktop is a GTK fork, and it runs pretty light. And anytime I go to virtualize anything, anytime I open up the good old GNOME boxes, and I go to start virtualizing a desktop, guess what? It never fails, guys. Like, it sucks horribly. So I ran a couple tests on here. So there was one day I was just doing normal workflow. I probably had 5-6 applications open, a web browser with 5 or 6 tabs, SSH going, private internet access going. So I was throttling some of my network at that point. And the operating system never skipped a beat. So for multitasking, it did very well. As you can see, I have multiple VMs here. So I have a Neon project. I have 2 Ubuntu servers. One is a blow-up one. Another one is kind of to do some other things I've intended. And then, I've never had to use it, but for some reason, I always keep a Win7 VM around. And some of you might be like, that's sacrilege. When you have friends and family who use Windows, sometimes they need a task completed that you can only do inside of a Windows operating system. And in those cases, having that's really there. But to me, I think it's just more there because I'm just used to seeing it there. But anyway, I've ran all of them and not an ounce of performance problems. So tons of application multitasking. Virtualizing, okay. Next test, gaming. I'm not a huge gamer, and this laptop is not a gaming laptop. This is an enterprise level machine. This is a Dell Latitude with an i5, 8 gigs of RAM, a solid state, and Intel graphics. However, even with that hardware, it should be able to run certain games effectively. So one game, of course, I did test, and I play it frequently with my son, is Minecraft. Other games that I have tested on here was Bastion, Eldridge, Game Dev Tycoon, Half-Life 2, and Team Fortress 2, all of which ran on a 1080p screen flawlessly. The only thing that gave me problems was 3089. And the problems it gave me is it wouldn't run, period. And I'm not quite sure, I haven't played that one in a while, so I don't know if that's to Solus or just Linux in general, but all the other games ran, and I would like to point out that 2 or 3 of those games are not Valve games. Valve has done really good quality ports over to Linux. That's not always the case with every game that comes to Linux, but that's the gaming performance was really well. Now you guys should know, okay, Devin, performance was great, but there's something else that you would normally test, right? And it would usually be a deciding factor whether I continue to use a operating system or not. And one of the issues, and it's why this video shipped late, was I actually did a video on this already. And what happened was I wasn't paying to my OBS, and I finished and I stopped it and went back and watched the video. And on my OBS screen here, there was just constant tearing through the video, just flipping, constant tearing. In most distributions, especially ones that I've used before, I would normally be like, "10, I'm done. I'm gonna go back to my Ubuntu." That's great. There's 2 reasons why I didn't end up doing that. First off, this is a rolling distribution, which means that there is the possibility things can break from time to time. Okay. The other thing, it's also a newer distribution. There's quite a few people, from my knowledge, using Solus. There may not necessarily be a lot of people who are using Solus with OBS. So I did something I have not done in an extraordinarily long time, and that was enroll with the Solus forums. And I was very impressed. I was very impressed. I asked my question under multimedia, and here it is, OBS flickering. And the gentleman who is helping me, Sonny here, he was a great guy. And notice this, he's part of the development team. Okay, he's part of the development team. He pointed me to an article, fixed my issue very, very quickly. And that's something else I'd like to kind of point out that kind of caught me. I was looking in, they have like a ideas section. I think it was under the ideas, store ideas. He posts quite frequently, Ike. He's the project founder. So we have a lot of the development team, we have the project founder in here, and through a lot of the posts that I'm going through, I'm seeing they're very active in their own community. Now, one that's kind of cool to me because they're active in the community. There's a lot of other distributions I've used where there's like, the community may be there, but the development team who's maintaining that is not present. So to see Solus's main guys on the front line in the community forum, I think is just absolutely phenomenal. I really do. I think it is something to be proud of on their end. I literally got an answer on how to fix OBS within less than an hour of me posting, "This is a problem for me," midday on, I think, a weekend. That is flipping awesome. That kind of support is great, and because it's part of the development team, you know, some issues like that on Ubuntu, I'm not saying there aren't really good, smart people on the Ubuntu, but you don't have usually direct line to the developers, or the developers aren't very active in the community. They post an update or a patch that may end up breaking something you use. The community may take them a week or two to figure out what the hell that was. I'm not saying we have a direct line to the developers over at Solus, but with them being active in their community, it really does help resolve issues at a much faster pace. So this was something I was actually very super excited about. And that was one of the problems I encountered. I was so upset. I almost dropped it, but I said, let me check out these forums. And like I said, it's been a long time since I've used some forums. So anyway, I hope you guys liked the video. I don't think I missed anything. I think I covered everything from the desktop design to package management to some problems I've had to even, I normally, because I do VM testing, I don't even really do much performance testing. And I don't believe in doing benchmarks. I don't believe in loading a bunch of fancy software that pushes the machine because, honestly, what is more impressive than software is people. So yeah, I could get a piece of software that runs an algorithm or a graphics test or whatever in a certain pattern that the computer stresses it out. To me, what's more impressive is actually putting a computer through real use that there's no APIs, there's nothing designed around what I'm doing. I'm just using this as a tool, and it held to the performance with the exception of that OBS issue, and that got fixed. And so I'm perfectly content with this. I'm really good with this distribution, and I think I might stay on it for quite a bit to see how it evolves, because it is simplistic, but at the same time there is a great level of consistency throughout the desktop, which is something that I can appreciate. It's something I can appreciate. I mean, it's very consistent. Another thing I will knock on them for, though, is if this distribution is aiming towards bringing anyone to the Linux desktop, which means end users as well, their package, the default packages, I was a little disappointed in. A lot of them are good, but example being, they did ship VLC, which I love. Distributions who ship Totem, I think, is cute. VLC is the best media player out there, and I have read some compelling arguments why distributions don't ship VLC, because it's more than just a video player. But upon first interaction, it just looks like a video player, and its codec support is amazing. But then they complement it with Rhythmbox for a music player, and I found that just horrible. Rhythmbox I think is okay, but no music or Clementine or Tomahawk, or there's a ton of other great music players in the open source community that's better than Rhythmbox. The other thing is I installed it because I might use it someday. LibreOffice. It did not come with LibreOffice, which is almost like a staple in most distributions. And part of the thing that kind of upset me with them not shipping LibreOffice is, even if people don't use it, what if I get an email and someone is sending me a document and I double click on the document and it doesn't open? Well, now I got to take time out of my workflow to go install software. And for someone maybe who's new to Linux, they may not know there's such thing as LibreOffice. They might try to figure out how to get Microsoft Office installed. Whereas if you included the default program, when they go to double click on a document, it will open in LibreOffice and they'll go, oh, so this is my word processor. Who knew? Right? So there is, like I said, to me, like, defaults aren't horribly important, but if you are trying to attract new people to your distribution, especially people who could be new to Linux, I'm going to make the fair case argument that defaults are important. Okay. So what's coming up? Well, there is a couple things that I do want to talk about. One of the things I do want to talk about is the new Windows 10 Creators Update, and not the operating system. And I'm not even going to go into the privacy concerns because there's already a ton of other people who've made a video on that. I actually want to go with the bad business model that sits behind that into something I call double dipping, and I'm putting it out there so maybe you guys can like get some time to kind of what is he talking about double dipping? Because in my opinion, Microsoft's double dipping financially. And how that should be criminal. The other thing I also wanted to cover, I did the whole Ubuntu desktop dangling thing, right? I would like to kind of talk about not so much Ubuntu anymore because I did that video, but I'd kind of like to talk about the status or the state of open source phone, Firefox Mobile, Sailfish, Ubuntu Touch. Right? We have all these great desktops, and it feels like on the phone we just cannot launch. And I'm going to tell you guys why we can't launch, and what we'll need to do to launch. And until someone figures out how to do this to make it launch, what you can do in the meantime that I'm actually currently working on with my own phone as my own project. And then the other thing I'm also going to be working on is some educational videos. And when I say educational, this will be fun and geeky, but we're going to go over how some use cases that you may want to use a VPS. And we're also going to go over some use cases. We're having a bare metal server at home. It can be a lot of fun. And before you guys go, oh, bare metal server, guys, you can pick up a bare metal server for under $200 at like Walmart.com. And I'll show you what those guys, because I know some guys are like, you can get a 2U rack. I never said 2U, I never said 4U, I never said any of that. I'll show you guys how you can actually have a pretty cool home setup. And then we'll go over how to install some cool setup and configure some cool applications like a Samba file share, a Plex media server, a Minecraft server. I did do an own cloud, but I might do a Nextcloud setup demonstrating how to do that. So there's a lot of cool tools that you can use a server for in your home environment that your family would actually really enjoy, or you might even really enjoy. So, but those are some of the things coming up. I hope you guys enjoyed my video. Give it a thumbs up, give it a thumbs down, I don't care. Post a comment, but one thing I would enjoy is to see some more subscribers, so please do. Thank you.